Upon the icy blue dust he stands. He does not feel it beneath the boots, or the turn of the ground as it spins through its little corner of space. He had been there, standing, for so long that such things were long gone from sensation. Not that it mattered to him. The pitiful turn of a small speck, the simple binding of atoms together that made the dust, all that was irrelevant save for one detail about him, that he had made them so. The planet had borne witness to the might of his sister and himself. The inhabitants had taken arms, as they always did, in their ludicrous belief that survival was possible. They were now dust that was layered on the planet's surface, the messy bags of chemicals and organs that were life on this planet. They had dared to think that they could hold all that was to come. He had never learnt their names as he tore them apart with the tiniest pressure and wrenched their planet from its solar system. Why would he? But many had learnt his name. They had all heard him call it upon their battlefields. The occasional survivors, the onlookers from other worlds, but none of them could say it. It was beyond their articulation. Instead, they had settled beneath that height, with their best attempts at translating it. Cartharak Aplis, Shalom Metori, the othered, Digija Ragno, Swarm. The dust beneath him would never be named, but he would be forever named over and over, an unending lineage of names for the universe to fear. Yet, in cruelest irony, that dust beneath his feet was relatively more free than he ever was. He growled slightly, though there was no one living to hear it. At least, not quite yet. The timing was always perfect. It had been all these years, a definite, absolute, unchanging 57 rotations of the rock he was upon. He had seen through so many rotations, so many years, that he could distinguish the time perfectly. Could count every moment of his imprisonment. Imprisonment by those fools, because of the Doctor. Of course, who else but the Doctor? He mulled how they had both danced their little dance, and then the Doctor had caught him on one little misstep. Then he was here. Now he was still here. To stay within a frustratingly small confinement on one tiny sliver of ground upon a tiny speck in some seldom-travelled edge of reality. Every particle of dust below his feet the same throughout millennia. Every particle of air taken in, expelled, and then recycled. Every particle of himself older and yet not broken. His youth was long gone in physical form. It had been, even then, but his mind remained as sharp as it always had. He knew every detail of this prison. The latest 57 rotations came to an end in this count, and in a swirl of blue haze, Shay appeared, some distance in front of him. The Watcher that had taken up the mantle for the last few millennia. It had taken some time to grasp at the edges of her existence. Division operatives were a little more complex than linear beings, but her name had become clear to him snatched from the very corners of her mind that she buried it into without her knowledge. Sentak. It was a name he had remembered all this time. She would visit him every 57 rotations, always, to do as her pitiful division always asked of her, to check on his imprisonment, to maintain his cell, ever since the last watcher had been reassigned. Because that's what they all did, no matter the species, no matter the origin. The division operatives would blindly follow whoever was above them, even when he had been free. That much was apparent, his face buried deep within itself. They had such arrogance, constraining time itself, utter blasphemy. And yet they had done so, despite the best efforts of himself and his sister. The division had created the Temple of Atropos. Nestled among the dark times, it could never have escaped their attention. A defiance of God, like so many others. They would have to pay. Species then alive, but now very much extinct. All by their hands. Time had, in its only blessing, bestowed upon them the power to undo believers, breaking them down spatially, not just atom separation or disintegration, but complete spatial flattening across the plane of time. Blasphemers could not be given a simple mercy of a quick tearing apart, or an agonizing final scream. Instead they were stretched, screaming from the beginning of time, until its onwards pulling, ever-changing end, endlessly. He liked to imagine their screams. The many he had ravaged in his corner of space as tribute to his holy time. The millions of which he had first crammed into a passing uniform and then dealt with appropriately. Such an efficient way. Perhaps a few of them understood. Yes, perhaps. In their fine moments as they lay compressed within one spatial entity, as they fell across landscapes that meant nothing. That he was right. That space had no cause to be. That only time and ultimately ascension should be. But not the division they would never see. Crawling through the mistakes of the past, they had carved the abominable combination of space-times they felt fit, as though they were gods. And to ensure that he could not undo the mistake, they had implemented countermeasures. They had pushed him to a limit. Millions were flattened in one touch, but ultimately it was the division's fault. For letting those people live in spatial form, for giving them belief in a false way of life, and for refusing to yield to a righteous and holy cause. The founding conflict had been turned against them because of her, the Doctor. With her ridiculous attempts to feign moral superiority and righteousness, he fumed even more in his head. He had upheld the heresy, smuggled the Mori, trapped his sister and himself, and when sentence was passed, it was great cruelty. His sister's memories suppressed, and her form cloaked under a morphic resonance. His last sight of her being her bundled into a vessel by a division agent assigned as her handler. He swore that on that day he would kill that handler and free her from such cruelty. Human life, utterly pathetic. Even more infuriatingly pathetic than his perpetual imprisonment. He was shaken from his bubbling thoughts of rage by the approaching sight of Ensentak. And another agent, a new watcher. How interesting that was. It was then that a glimmer struck him, something that, to his surprise, wrenched him free from his body. A shifting in reality, a weakness, a virus. Then he could feel her there. Katari Mundra, or Sock, or as she would always be underneath all the code names and aliases she layered on top. Tekte-un. Was this an attempt to gloat? No. This was not her style. Then he felt reality shift even further. And to his surprise, she channeled her words into his head, bounding around in his own voice, as though he was himself an instrument of her. The nerve. You can feel that, can't you? You are relatively simple, but still, you can. You are just enough for that. That would be the doing of our mutual connection. The meaning stuck clear. The Doctor. They have done the division a great service. Stupid child that they insist on being. And now, that which you feel is the result of their actions across the cosmos. There was a temptation in Swarm to state the obvious, that Tekte-un had let the Doctor into this world, that he had been right about that misplaced morality, but there was no time for gloating. A reality virus. It was harmless, a simple test of my own contingencies, entrusted to a being that believed herself to be the first. The first, he growled. How dare his voice be made to speak of that creature, one of the first spatial beings, one of the faults that had led them all to this cumbersome heresy. You would have liked her by now, in your wheelhouse, Swarm, but that wouldn't do at all. Realization dawned. The first had finally realized the way of time was right. But Tekte-un had set up a situation to fell any attempts she would make to right the wrongs, just as Tekte-un had done to himself. And so, she would light a spark of chaos, as would plenty others, I'm sure, even beyond my division's agreement. But enough of that. The Doctor interfered. As if on cue, reality shook the seams again. Swarm felt himself slightly more aware, slightly more as he should be. She had led the reality virus right to the hands of the Cybermen. I have one of my few remaining teams at work to guide the situation as required. Make sure it ends as it should. But she will sufficiently break enough before then. She will begin to remember. Oh yes, the timeless child. It will take some time after the resolution of the situation, but the predictive analysis suggests not long. She will begin to get excited of the past. Of me. Of division. Swarm waited for her to continue. Which brings me to you. I have a proposition. He laughed derisively. I understand your contempt, Swarm, but she has crossed the line. My experiments are truly damaging. He laughed again. After all the time of trying to completely deconstruct the heretics, one of their own would finally prove to be their undoing. You can have the universe. All his thoughts dropped away at that statement, forced from his own lips, as he focused on her. I have devised a more potent creation, better than the virus. I will be releasing the first and likely only iteration momentarily. So you can have the universe swarm, and the Zor too, but you will do one thing for me. Just one thing for all that. Swarm needed no further elaboration. After millennia, the Queen of the Heretics was bowing to the division mission. After millennia, the Queen of the Heretics was bowing to his divine mission. Standing aside and allowing the inevitable, he could vaguely glance in her mind now that she had plans to escape this universe. Plans he made note of, but for now, he nodded. You will stop the Doctor. Keep her away from my creation, the Flux. Let it rain havoc and bring down the victory you have been long hoping for. He nodded again. I'm glad that we have an arrangement. And like that, she was gone, and he was back in his body. But, he noted, the field was shifting. It was not quite restricting his mind as it did before. He could sense the disruption of reality, and specifically, how it was being funneled into the machinery around himself. Tecteun was funneling the virus's impact into it. It was failing. And then he felt utter bliss as he sensed that fade and be replaced with... And then he felt utter bliss as he sensed that fade and be replaced immediately by a far greater disruption, a flux in the state of the universe. And Sentek reached him with her accomplice, a name now clear, Kay Tosks. He spoke. Your last tour, Sentek. And it was true. Reality was undone. The final mental safeguards had failed. In a matter of seconds, so too would the containment chamber. He could see the plan laid out before by time. Why the Watchers changed over? Because otherwise he could grab their time streams and strip them apart to the replenishing meal. The containment would fail, and he had millennia of history with Sentek. He would make a delightful meal, renew his youth and vigour, which would be needed. Then he would free Kay Tosks from this failure of existence, and do what needed to be done for Tecteun to dismantle the universe. And after that, do what needed to be done to rid time of the division. Then free it, and onwards to the next universe, and the next. All would take the righteous path of time. Then, glorious ascension. The containment chamber failed, and for the first time in a long time, Swarm could feel the ground beneath him. Upon the icy blue dust, he feels it beneath his boots, and the turn of the ground as it spins through its little corner of the universe. He at last, once again, properly stood upon Burnished Rage. And like all of space and its experience, it is a woeful error, but he would correct it in moments to come, for his almighty time.